My sister claimed her husband hated our family gatherings, but when I asked him about it, he was clueless. Turns out she made it all up. Family events were the glue that held us together. My mom lived for hosting, whether it was a birthday, a holiday, or just an excuse to have us all under one roof. There was something comforting about the chaos of our gatherings. The smell of Mom's lasagna baking in the oven, Jake's terrible but somehow endearing playlist blasting through the speakers, and the sound of laughter echoing through the house. Everyone played a part. Rachel, my older sister, was Mom's right hand in the kitchen. Jake, our younger brother, handled the music and turned every conversation into a stand-up routine. My role was less defined. I floated around, topping up drinks, helping with random tasks, and catching up with everyone. Then there was Adam, Rachel's husband. Quiet and reserved, he didn't exactly blend into the family dynamic, but he was polite enough and always showed up. He'd nurse a drink, occasionally laugh at Jake's jokes, and help clear plates when asked. At first, Rachel's comments about Adam didn't raise any red flags. We were washing dishes after one of Mom's legendary lasagna dinners when she sighed and said, "Adam's not really a fan of the food, you know." I paused, holding a plate under the running water. "What do you mean?" "He had 2 helpings." "Yeah, but he thinks it's bland," Rachel replied, rolling her eyes. "He just doesn't want to hurt anyone's feelings." That caught me off guard. Adam had seemed perfectly content during dinner, even complimenting Mom on the meal. But I shrugged it off. Maybe he was just good at hiding his feelings. The comments didn't stop there. At our next family dinner, Rachel casually mentioned that Adam hated how loud Jake's music was. "He says it gives him a headache," she whispered as we set the table. A few weeks later, it was the decorations. "Adam thinks Mom goes overboard with the themes," Rachel said, gesturing to the paper lanterns strung across the living room. He called them tacky. At first, I didn't think much of it. Adam was quiet and reserved, so maybe Rachel was just airing the thoughts he didn't feel comfortable saying out loud. But as the complaints piled up, I couldn't help but start to see him in a different light. Why did he even bother coming to these events if he hated them so much? I started noticing his body language. Was he sitting farther away from the group? Did he seem bored or uncomfortable? Was his polite laughter forced? The seed Rachel had planted grew into doubt, and I couldn't stop watering it. The turning point came at a small family barbecue Mom hosted one sunny Saturday. Jake was manning the grill, cracking jokes about how he'd perfected his burger flipping technique, while Mom flitted around making sure everything was running smoothly. Rachel and I were in the kitchen, arranging the dessert table, when she dropped another bomb. "Adam doesn't really like these gatherings," she said with a shrug. "What now?" I asked, already exasperated. "It's just everything. The food, the decorations, the music. He thinks it's all a bit much," Rachel said, avoiding my gaze. "I mean, he comes for my sake, but if it were up to him, he'd skip them entirely." I stared at her, my frustration bubbling to the surface. "Then why doesn't he just stay home?" Rachel sighed dramatically. "Because he knows how much these things mean to Mom. He's trying to be nice, but it's not his thing. Don't take it personally." But how could I not? These events were our family's way of staying connected, of celebrating each other. The idea that Adam secretly hated them, and us, was hard to swallow. That night, I found myself watching him more closely than ever. He seemed fine, laughing at one of Jake's jokes and chatting with Mom about her garden. But Rachel's words echoed in my head, coloring everything he did. Was that smile fake? Did he really care about what Mom was saying, or was he just going through the motions? I didn't say anything at the time, but the frustration lingered long after the barbecue ended. Rachel's comments had put a wedge between me and Adam, and I couldn't let it go. If he had such a low opinion of our family, I needed to hear it from him directly. Little did I know, I was about to uncover something that would turn my perception of Rachel and Adam completely upside down. Rachel's complaints about Adam had gone from occasional grumbles to a near-constant stream of negativity. Each time it was something new. First it was the food. Then the music, the decorations, and now, apparently, our jokes. "He says your jokes are so childish," Rachel said one afternoon, emphasizing the last 2 words like they physically annoyed her. She was helping Mom set the table for another family dinner while I watched from across the room, holding a tray of drinks. "Childish," I repeated, my tone sharper than I intended. Rachel shrugged, not looking up. "You know Adam, he's not into the whole Jake trying to be a comedian routine. He just thinks it's a bit much." That comment lodged itself in my brain, festering. Sure, Jake's jokes weren't exactly highbrow humor, but they were harmless fun. part of what made our family gatherings feel lively and warm. And Adam had always seemed to chuckle along with the rest of us. Now I couldn't stop wondering, was he laughing at us instead of with us? By the time everyone arrived for dinner that evening, I was practically vibrating with frustration. Adam showed up with Rachel, as usual, carrying a bottle of wine and greeting everyone with his typical calm demeanor. He smiled at Mom, thanked her for hosting, and even complimented the smell of the roast chicken. But Rachel's words had poisoned the well. Every interaction I observed felt like evidence of a hidden agenda. When Jake cracked a pun about chickens crossing the road, Adam laughed. I couldn't help but wonder if the laugh was fake. When Mom mentioned redecorating the living room, Adam nodded thoughtfully, but was he secretly thinking about how tacky her taste was? I couldn't stand it anymore. After dinner, while the rest of the family lingered in the living room, I found Rachel in the kitchen, loading the dishwasher. Why does Adam even come if he hates these events so much? I asked, my voice low but intense. She glanced up at me, startled. What do you mean? You keep saying he doesn't like the food or the music or the jokes or whatever. If he feels that way, why bother showing up? Rachel sighed, shutting the dishwasher a little too forcefully. Because he's trying to keep the peace. He knows how much these dinners mean to Mom, and he doesn't want to hurt her feelings. It sounded plausible, but there was something in her tone, defensive, almost rehearsed, that made me pause. So, what, he's just suffering through these dinners out of obligation? I pressed. She shrugged. Basically, her casual attitude made my frustration boil over. Well, maybe he should stop pretending to like us and just stay home, I snapped. Rachel turned to face me, her expression a mix of irritation and something else I couldn't quite place. Why are you making such a big deal out of this? Adam's introverted. These events aren't his thing. It's not like he's being rude to anyone. I'm making a big deal because it feels like he's lying to all of us, I said. If he doesn't want to be here, fine, but don't act like everything's fine to our faces and then complain behind our backs. Rachel stared at me for a moment, then shook her head. You're overthinking this, she said, brushing past me to grab a stack of plates. Just let it go. But I couldn't let it go. That night, as I watched Adam help Jake clear the table and laugh along with one of Mom's stories, Rachel's words kept playing in my head. Was he really faking it? Was he secretly miserable, just waiting to escape as soon as the night ended? I didn't want to confront Adam directly. It felt too risky, too confrontational, but the frustration lingered long after the guests had left, and the house was quiet. Rachel's complaints had turned something simple and joyful into a source of doubt, and I couldn't shake the feeling that there was more to the story than she was letting on. The worst part was that I didn't know who to believe anymore. Rachel's comments were so specific, so insistent, that they had to come from somewhere. But Adam's behavior didn't match up. Either he was a master at hiding his true feelings, or Rachel wasn't telling the whole truth. I didn't realize it then, but I was already starting to see cracks in Rachel's story. And those cracks were about to split wide open. Jake's baby shower was supposed to be a celebration. My mom had gone all out, transforming her backyard into a pastel wonderland with balloons, streamers, and a table overflowing with food. Jake and his wife, Emily, glowed as they opened gifts, surrounded by family and friends. It should have been one of those perfect family moments, but I couldn't stop staring at Adam. He stood by the drinks table, sipping a soda and looking as calm as ever. He chatted briefly with one of Jake's friends, nodding and smiling, but mostly stayed on the sidelines observing. Rachel's words from earlier in the week rang in my head. He says the decorations are tacky. He thinks the games are stupid. Watching Adam, I couldn't reconcile the image she'd painted with the man in front of me. If he truly hated these events, he hid it well. The frustration bubbled over, and before I could stop myself, I crossed the yard and approached him. Adam, can we talk for a second? I asked, keeping my tone as casual as I could manage. He nodded, looking a little confused. Sure, what's up? I hesitated, glancing around to make sure no one was listening. Jake was busy opening gifts, and Rachel was chatting with a cousin on the other side of the yard. Satisfied we wouldn't be overheard, I took a deep breath. Rachel's mentioned a few times that you're not a fan of our family events, I said carefully. The food, the music, the decorations. Is everything okay? Adam's brow furrowed. What are you talking about? I could feel my face heating up. She said you think Mom's food is bland, that the music is too loud, and that the decorations are over the top. Adam stared at me for a moment, his expression shifting from confusion to disbelief. And then, to my surprise, he started laughing. I've never said any of that, he said, shaking his head. Your mom's food is amazing. I've told Rachel that more than once. And the decorations? They're great. Honestly, I've always thought your family's events are kind of fun. I blinked, trying to process his response. So, you don't think Jake's jokes are childish, or that the music's annoying or any of that? No, Adam said firmly. Where is this even coming from? For a moment, I was too stunned to answer. Rachel's complaints had seemed so specific, so genuine. I'd spent weeks stewing over them, letting them color the way I saw Adam, only to find out he had no idea what I was talking about. She's been saying this stuff for months, I said finally, more to myself than to him. Every time we talk about these events, she makes it sound like you can't stand them. Adam frowned, looking genuinely concerned. I don't know why she'd say that, he said. I mean, sure, I'm not the most outgoing guy, but I like spending time with your family. Everyone's been really welcoming to me. The sincerity in his voice was impossible to ignore. If he was lying, he deserved an Oscar. I'm sorry, I said, feeling a wave of guilt wash over me. I needed to clear the air. It's been bothering me. Adam shrugged, giving me a small, understanding smile. No harm done. But maybe you should talk to Rachel about it. I'd like to know why she thinks I feel that way. Adam's reaction at Jake's baby shower had been a gut punch. I had spent weeks stewing over Rachel's complaints, convinced Adam was secretly judging us. But when I confronted him, his confusion and outright amusement was impossible to fake. His sincerity made it clear that something wasn't adding up, and Rachel was the missing piece of the puzzle. After the shower, I couldn't wait any longer. Rachel was helping Mom clean up, folding tablecloths and stacking dishes, when I cornered her in the kitchen. Why is Adam saying he never complained about our events? I asked, keeping my tone steady but firm. Rachel froze mid-fold, her knuckles whitening as she gripped the tablecloth. She didn't look at me, and her voice was shaky when she finally spoke. What are you talking about? I asked Adam about the things you've been saying about the food, the music, the decorations, and he had no idea what I was talking about, I said. He told me he loves Mom's cooking, and he thinks the decorations are great. So, why are you making it sound like he hates everything? Her laugh was forced, brittle. He probably just didn't want to admit it to you, she said, shrugging like it wasn't a big deal. Rachel, I said, my voice sharpening. He looked me in the eye and laughed when I told him what you said. He seemed completely baffled. So, what's going on? She finally turned to face me, her cheeks flushed, and for a moment, she looked like she might argue. But then her shoulders sagged, and the fight drained out of her. I don't want to talk about this right now, she muttered, brushing past me with the tablecloth still in hand. Her deflection only added fuel to the fire burning inside me. Rachel, this isn't just about you, I called after her, keeping my voice low enough not to draw Mom's attention. You've been making Adam look bad for no reason. Do you know how awkward that's been for the rest of us? She spun around, her face tight with anger. And something else, something I couldn't quite place. I said I don't want to talk about it, she hissed before storming out the back door. I stood there, stunned. Rachel wasn't just being defensive, she was running from something. And whatever it was, it had to be bigger than a few offhand complaints about family dinners. Over the next few days, Rachel went completely radio silent. She ignored my texts, let my calls go to voicemail, and even avoided our family group chat. I tried catching her at home, but Adam answered the door instead. She's not feeling well, he said, looking genuinely concerned. I didn't buy it. Rachel wasn't just avoiding me. She was hiding. The silence stretched on until Mom brought it up during a phone call. Rachel's been acting strange lately, she said. Is everything okay between you two? It's complicated, I admitted, not wanting to drag Mom into the mess. But I'll handle it. The opportunity to handle it came a week later when Rachel finally agreed to meet me for coffee. She looked nervous when she walked into the cafe, her usual confidence replaced by a kind of twitchy restlessness. She sat down across from me, fidgeting with her sleeves and avoiding my gaze. Why did you want to meet? She asked, though her tone suggested she already knew. You know why? I said, leaning forward. Rachel, I need to know the truth. Why have you been lying about Adam? She flinched at the word lying, her cheeks turning pink. I wasn't lying, she said defensively. Then what do you call it? I shot back. Because Adam made it pretty clear, he doesn't feel the way you've been saying he does. So what's going on? Rachel stared down at her coffee, her fingers tracing the rim of the cup. For a moment, I thought she might clam up again, but then she let out a long, shaky sigh. I didn't think it would matter, she said quietly. What wouldn't matter? I asked, my frustration mounting. She looked up at me, her eyes glossy, with unshed tears. I felt like no one was paying attention to me anymore, she admitted. Ever since Jake got married and started having a baby, it's like the whole family revolves around him. And Adam is so quiet, no one ever notices us. I guess I just wanted, I don't know, something to talk about. Her words hit me like a punch to the gut. So, you made up stories about Adam to get attention? She nodded miserably. It wasn't supposed to be a big deal. I didn't think anyone would confront him about it. I just wanted to feel included, like I mattered. I sat back in my chair, stunned. Part of me wanted to yell at her, to tell her how selfish and hurtful she'd been. But the defeated look on her face stopped me. Rachel wasn't just being dramatic, she was genuinely struggling. You could have just said something, I said finally, my voice softer now. You didn't have to drag Adam or the rest of us into your feelings. I know, she whispered, tears slipping down her cheeks. I just didn't know how else to deal with it. For the first time in my life, I didn't know how to feel about my sister. She wasn't the villain I'd imagined in my head, but she wasn't innocent either. Her actions had hurt Adam, our family, and me. And for what? A fleeting sense of validation? As I watched her cry into her untouched coffee, I realized this wasn't just about clearing Adam's name anymore. It was about figuring out how to rebuild the trust Rachel had so carelessly broken. And I had no idea where to start. 2 days after our tense coffee shop meeting, I was at Mom's house, helping her sort through old photo albums. The project had started with the innocent goal of creating a scrapbook for Jake and Emily to celebrate the upcoming baby. But as we sifted through pictures of birthdays, holidays, and backyard barbecues, it became a walk down memory lane that felt heavier than usual. Look at this one, Mom said, holding up a photo of Jake in a makeshift superhero cape he'd fashioned from a tablecloth. I laughed despite myself, remembering the chaos of that day. The sound of a car pulling into the driveway interrupted us. A moment later, the front door opened and Rachel walked in. Her face was blotchy, her eyes swollen and red. She looked like she'd spent the night crying. We need to talk, she said, her voice trembling. Mom and I exchanged a glance. Of course, Mom said, concern immediately clouding her features. What's wrong? Rachel dropped her purse on the counter and sat heavily at the kitchen table, burying her face in her hands. Mom followed, gesturing for me to join. As we sat down, Rachel's sobs broke the silence. I've messed everything up, she choked out. Rachel, you're scaring me, Mom said gently. What's going on? I already had an idea of what was coming, but hearing it was another matter entirely. Between gasps and tears, Rachel confessed the truth. Adam never said those things, she admitted, her voice cracking. Not about the food, or the music, or the decorations. It was all me. Mom's face fell, her eyes widening. What? She whispered. Rachel wiped at her face, with shaking hands. I made it all up, she said. Every single thing. Adam had nothing to do with it. Why? I asked, stunned. Why would you lie about that? Rachel hesitated, her gaze darting between us before she blurted out, because I wanted attention. She burst into fresh tears, her words tumbling out in a flood. Everyone's so focused on Jake and his perfect life, his marriage, the baby on the way. I just felt invisible. The air seemed to go out of the room. Mom sank back in her chair, her hand covering her mouth. I leaned forward, trying to process what I was hearing. You lied about your husband, about our family, to get attention? I asked, my voice a mix of disbelief and anger. Rachel nodded miserably. I didn't mean for it to go this far, she said. It started as small things, just, I don't know, something to talk about. But then it snowballed, and I couldn't stop. Mom's voice trembled as she spoke. Rachel, we would have listened to you if you felt left out. You didn't have to do this. I know, Rachel whispered, her face crumpling again. I didn't know how to deal with it. Jake's always been the golden child, and now he's having a baby, and everyone's so excited. I felt like no one cared about me anymore. Her words hung in the air, heavy and raw. I didn't know what to say. On one hand, I felt a pang of sympathy for her. Feeling invisible in your own family is a pain I wouldn't wish on anyone. But on the other hand, her actions had hurt people, Adam most of all. Mom broke the silence first. Have you told Adam? Rachel shook her head. Not yet. I'm scared to. I don't want him to hate me. He has every right to be upset, I said, my tone harsher than I intended. You made him look bad for months, Rachel. Do you even realize how unfair that was? I know, she said, her voice breaking. I know I messed up, okay? She stopped, her hands balling into fists on the table. I didn't mean to hurt anyone. I just wanted to feel important again. Mom reached out and took Rachel's hand, her expression softening. Rachel, we love you, she said gently. You've always been important to us. But what you did was wrong, and you need to take responsibility for it. Rachel nodded, fresh tears streaming down her face. I'll talk to Adam, she said quietly. I'll tell him everything. And I think I need to talk to someone like a therapist. I can't keep feeling this way. Hearing her say that was a small relief, but it didn't erase the damage. The trust Rachel had broken wouldn't be easy to rebuild, not with Adam, not with the rest of us. After Rachel left, Mom and I sat in silence for a while. Finally, she spoke, her voice heavy with sadness. I had no idea she felt that way, she said. I wish she'd come to me instead of doing this. Me too, I said quietly. As I drove home that night, I replayed Rachel's breakdown in my mind. Her pain was real, but so was the hurt she'd caused. The road ahead wasn't going to be easy, for her, for Adam, or for the rest of us. And I wasn't sure if we'd ever fully get back to the way things were. The fallout from Rachel's confession was inevitable, but it didn't make it any easier to deal with. Mom, worried about the tension brewing beneath the surface, decided to call a family meeting. She didn't say much when she invited us, but the tone in her voice made it clear that something serious was coming. Jake, Emily, Rachel, Adam, and I all ended up in Mom's living room on a Sunday afternoon, the atmosphere as heavy as the clouds outside. Rachel looked nervous from the start. She avoided eye contact, fidgeting with her sleeve, and sat as far from Adam as the couch allowed. Jake, on the other hand, was stone-faced, his usual lightheartedness replaced by a simmering anger I wasn't used to seeing. Once everyone was seated, Mom took a deep breath. I think we need to address what's been going on, she began, glancing briefly at Rachel. There's been a lot of hurt feelings and confusion, and it's time to clear the air. Rachel's head dropped lower, her hair falling forward to hide her face. What kind of confusion? Jake asked, though I could tell he wasn't really confused. He was just waiting for confirmation of what he already knew. Mom hesitated, as if she were hoping Rachel would speak up first. When she didn't, Mom sighed and continued, Rachel has admitted to saying things about Adam that aren't true. Things that have caused tension in the family. Jake's eyebrows shot up. What kind of things? Rachel let out a small, defeated sigh, but didn't speak. She's been telling us that Adam hates coming to our family events, I interjected, cutting through the silence. That he doesn't like the food, the music, the decorations, everything. But Adam didn't actually say any of that. Jake turned sharply toward Rachel, his expression hardening. Wait, what? You trashed Adam just to make yourself feel better? Rachel finally looked up, her face pale. It wasn't like that, she said quickly. I didn't mean for it to go this far. I wasn't thinking. Jake leaned forward, his voice low and biting. Oh, you weren't thinking? That's your excuse? You didn't just hurt Adam. You made all of us doubt him for no reason. Do you realize how unfair that is? Rachel flinched at his tone, her hands twisting in her lap. I know I messed up, she said softly, tears pooling in her eyes. I wasn't trying to hurt anyone. I felt invisible, okay? Ever since you got married and started having a baby, it's like everything in this family revolves around you. I felt like no one cared about me anymore. Jake's mouth opened, but no words came out. For a moment, his anger faltered, replaced by something softer, confusion, maybe, or guilt. But it was gone just as quickly. So, instead of talking to us about how you felt, you decided to throw Adam under the bus? That's not just petty, Rachel. It's cruel. I didn't think anyone would confront him about it, Rachel said, her voice cracking. I needed something to say. Something to remind people I exist. Jake shook his head, leaning back against the couch. Unbelievable, he muttered. Jake, Mom said firmly, giving him a warning look. No, Mom, he snapped, turning toward her. She needs to hear this. You don't fix feeling ignored by lying about the one person who's always been there for you. That's not fair to Adam, or to any of us. Jake, stop, Emily said softly, placing a hand on his arm. She's trying to explain. Rachel wiped her face with her sleeve, her tears flowing freely now. I'm sorry, she said, her voice trembling. I'm sorry to all of you, especially to Adam. I didn't mean to hurt anyone, I didn't know how else to handle it. The room fell silent, everyone processing her words. Adam, who had been quiet the entire time, finally spoke up. "Rachel, I get that you were feeling ignored," he said, his tone gentle but firm. "But you didn't have to drag me or your family into it. If you felt that way, you should have told me. We could have figured it out together." Rachel nodded miserably. "I know," she whispered. "I'll do better. I promise." Jake let out a sharp exhale, rubbing his temples. "Sorry isn't going to fix this overnight," he said, his voice still cold. "You need to actually do better, Rachel. This isn't something we're just going to forget about." Mom jumped in, her tone soft but insistent. "Rachel, I think therapy would be a good idea. For you, and maybe for you and Adam as a couple. You've got some things to work through, and that's okay, but you can't do it alone." Rachel looked at Adam, who nodded slightly. "I'm willing to go if you are," he said. "Okay," Rachel murmured, barely audible. "I'll do it." It wasn't the resolution we'd hoped for, but it was a start. The meeting ended with no hugs, no reassurances, just a tentative agreement to move forward. As we all went our separate ways, the tension in the air lingered like a storm cloud, and I couldn't shake the feeling that things would never quite be the same. Rachel had admitted her mistakes, but forgiveness would take time. And for now, all we could do was try to pick up the pieces. The days following the family meeting were heavy, like the entire household had been coated in a layer of awkward silence. Jake was still simmering with frustration, Mom looked exhausted, and even though Rachel had admitted her mistakes, the air around her felt fragile, like one wrong word might shatter her resolve completely. For my part, I couldn't stop replaying everything over in my head. Rachel's confession, Adam's quiet composure, Jake's biting anger. I felt caught in the middle of it all, unsure of how to move forward. The only person who seemed truly unshaken was Adam. His calm, steady demeanor remained intact, even as the rest of us wavered. I couldn't understand how he wasn't more upset, so I decided to reach out and clear the air. "Hey," I said when he picked up my call. "Can we meet up? I feel like I owe you an apology." "You don't owe me anything," he replied, his tone as even as always. "But sure, let's talk." We met at a coffee shop a few blocks from his office. When I arrived, he was already seated, a steaming mug of tea in his hands. He greeted me with a small nod, like we were old friends catching up instead of family members caught in the middle of a mess. "First of all," I began, sitting down across from him, "I'm sorry. I shouldn't have believed what Rachel said without asking you about it directly. I let her words cloud my judgment, and that wasn't fair to you." Adam took a sip of his tea, his expression thoughtful but kind. "You don't need to apologize," he said, setting the mug down. "I get it. You were hearing one thing from Rachel, and I'm sure it sounded believable at the time. I can't blame you for being confused." His understanding was disarming. I'd expected at least a hint of resentment, but there wasn't any. "Still," I pressed, "I feel terrible for doubting you. Rachel put you in an impossible position, and you handled it way better than I think most people would have." Adam shrugged, his lips curving into a small smile. "Rachel's been struggling," he said simply. "I don't think she meant to hurt anyone, me included. She just didn't know how to handle what she was feeling." Hearing him say that made me pause. I'd been so caught up in my own frustration that I hadn't fully considered Rachel's side. Sure, she'd made mistakes, big ones, but she wasn't malicious. She was just lost. "I wish I had your patience," I admitted after a moment. Adam chuckled softly, shaking his head. "It's not patience," he said. "It's just love. Rachel isn't perfect, but neither am I. If I want to expect forgiveness when I screw up, I have to be willing to give it when she does." His words struck a chord I hadn't expected. Adam's grace didn't erase the hurt Rachel had caused, but it gave me a new perspective. If he, the person most directly affected by her actions, could find it in himself to forgive her, then maybe the rest of us could, too. A few days later, Rachel called me. Her voice was quieter than usual, but there was a determination in her tone that caught my attention. "I just wanted to let you know I've scheduled my first therapy session," she said. "It's just for me at first, but Adam said he's willing to go with me later if I think it'll help." "That's a good step," I told her, meaning it. "I'm glad you're taking this seriously." "I am," she said earnestly. "I know I messed up, but I can't lose him. Or you guys. I want to fix this." Her sincerity felt genuine, and for the first time since this whole ordeal began, I felt a glimmer of hope. Rachel was far from perfect, but she was taking responsibility for her actions, and that was a start. Over the next few weeks, small but significant changes began to take shape. Rachel threw herself into therapy, attending weekly sessions, and even sharing some of what she was learning with me during our conversations. "I've been holding on to a lot of resentment," she admitted one day over the phone. "Not just about Jake, but about how I've felt like I don't measure up to him for years. I think I've been projecting that onto Adam without even realizing it." Her honesty was a refreshing change, and while I wasn't ready to fully trust her again, I could see that she was trying. Adam, meanwhile, remained steadfast in his quiet support. He attended a few therapy sessions with Rachel, helping her navigate her feelings while also addressing the strain the situation had put on their marriage. Despite everything, his commitment to her never wavered. Even Jake, who had been the most vocal in his anger, began to soften. At one family dinner, he surprised everyone by pulling Rachel into a hug as they cleared the table together. "I just want you to know I'm rooting for you," he said, his voice quieter than usual. Rachel nodded, her eyes glistening with tears. "Thanks, Jake. That means a lot." It wasn't perfect. There were still moments of tension, lingering doubts, and unspoken hurt. But for the first time in a long time, it felt like our family was moving in the right direction. Adam's grace had set the tone for healing, and while we still had a long road ahead, I felt cautiously optimistic that we'd get there together. The weeks after Rachel's confession were like navigating a minefield. Every interaction felt loaded with unspoken questions and hesitant emotions. Rachel had started trying to rebuild trust, but the wounds she left behind weren't the kind that healed quickly. Her lies had hurt Adam the most, but the ripple effects had spread through the entire family, leaving a strain on relationships that used to feel effortless. Rachel showed up early to family dinners now, volunteering to help Mom in the kitchen or set the table with Emily. She was trying so hard that it was almost uncomfortable to watch, her nervous energy filling the room as she scrambled to prove she cared. Mom acknowledged her efforts, but her usual warmth seemed subdued, replaced by a cautiousness I hadn't seen before. One evening, after everyone had left and the house was quiet, Mom finally let her feelings surface. As we cleaned up the dishes together, she sighed and set down a plate, staring into the soapy water. "I just don't understand why she didn't come to me," she said. "Why make up all those lies when she could have just told me how she felt?" It was a good question. Mom had always been the person Rachel leaned on, the one she turned to for advice or comfort. For Rachel to deceive her so deeply seemed like a betrayal in and of itself. "She said she didn't want to seem selfish," I explained, drawing a glass. "She felt like everything was about Jake and Emily and the baby, and she didn't think there was room for her feelings in all of that." Mom frowned, shaking her head. "That's not a good enough reason," she said. "I've always tried to make all of you feel included. If she felt left out, why didn't she just talk to me instead of dragging Adam and the rest of you into it?" I didn't have an answer for that. Neither did Rachel, I suspected. Rachel's progress was slow, but it was there. Therapy seemed to help her articulate the feelings she had bottled up for so long. She started opening up more during family dinners, sharing small insights from her sessions. "My therapist says I've been holding on to resentment for years," she said one evening, her voice tentative. "Not just about Jake, but about feeling like I always have to work twice as hard to be noticed. I think I took all of that out on Adam without realizing it." Her honesty was a step forward, but the room stayed quiet. Jake, sitting across the table, didn't look up from his plate. His silence spoke volumes, and Rachel's shoulders sagged slightly, but she pressed on. "I know I've hurt all of you, and I'm not expecting forgiveness overnight. I just want you to know I'm working on it." Mom gave her a small nod, her face softening, but Jake's demeanor didn't shift. His fork scraped against his plate as he pushed food around, clearly holding back his thoughts. The tension was palpable, but Rachel didn't retreat. She stayed engaged in the conversation, even as the responses she got felt lukewarm at best. Adam, as always, stood by her side. "She's really putting in the effort," he told me later that night when we spoke privately. "I know it's going to take time for everyone to see that, but I believe in her." His quiet faith in Rachel was humbling. While the rest of us wrestled with our own hurt and doubts, Adam seemed unshaken in his support for her. It was clear that his forgiveness wasn't conditional. It was a choice he made because he loved her, even at her lowest. I couldn't shake my own lingering frustration, though. Rachel's lies had planted seeds of doubt in all of us, and while I wanted to believe in her sincerity, I couldn't ignore how easily she had chosen deception over honesty. We met up one-on-one a few weeks after the family meeting, sitting on a park bench near her house. "Why didn't you just talk to us?" I asked bluntly, watching her fidget with the sleeve of her jacket. "Why not tell us how you were feeling instead of making Adam out to be the bad guy?" She sighed, staring down at her hands. I don't know, she admitted. I guess I was scared. Scared that if I said it out loud, it would sound stupid or selfish. Like I was just jealous of Jake and Emily. And instead, you made up stories about Adam, I said, my voice sharper than I intended. Do you know how unfair that was? To him. To all of us. Rachel flinched but nodded. I know, she said quietly. I wasn't thinking about the consequences. I just felt invisible, like I didn't matter to anyone anymore. And instead of dealing with that, I made it worse. Her voice cracked on the last word, and for the first time, I saw just how much guilt she was carrying. Rachel wasn't excusing her actions. She was owning them, and that was something. You know it's going to take time, right? I said after a moment. I know, she replied, her voice steady despite the tears in her eyes. I'm not expecting everything to go back to normal overnight. I just want to earn back your trust. All of you. You're on the right track, I told her, and for the first time since this whole mess began, I believed it. Therapy was helping Rachel, or at least that's how it seemed. The walls she had always kept around her emotions were starting to lower, and she was learning to share parts of herself we'd never seen before. At family dinners, she would offer updates about her sessions, her voice careful but genuine. It was a side of Rachel I wasn't used to, but it felt real. My therapist said I've spent so much of my life comparing myself to Jake, she said one evening, her voice softer than usual. It's not even about him, really. It's about me feeling like I'll never measure up, like no matter what I do, it's not enough. The table went quiet. Jake shifted uncomfortably, his fork lingering in midair. He glanced at Rachel but didn't say anything. She didn't seem discouraged by his silence, though. Instead, she continued, I think that's why I lashed out the way I did. I couldn't handle those feelings, so I turned them into resentment. Toward Adam, toward you guys, even toward myself. Mom gave her a small, encouraging smile, but it was cautious. Jake kept his head down, and the tension hung thick in the room. Rachel noticed, but instead of withdrawing, she stayed engaged, making an effort to keep the conversation going. It wasn't a breakthrough, but it was progress, and that felt significant. A few days later, Rachel and I met for coffee. She was more relaxed than I'd seen her in months, though there was still a weight to her demeanor. I've been thinking a lot about when we were kids, she said, stirring her drink. Did you ever feel like Mom and Dad expected more from me because I was the oldest? I took a moment to think. Yeah, I guess I did, I admitted. But I never thought it was unfair. You just always seemed like you had it together. You were Rachel, you could handle anything. She let out a bitter laugh. I never had it together. I just got good at pretending I did. The truth is, I've always felt like I was just one misstep away from everything falling apart. Her words caught me off guard. Rachel had always been the person I looked up to, the one who seemed to glide through life with ease. To hear her admit that she had been struggling all along was hard to reconcile with the image I had of her. I've spent so much of my life trying to be perfect, she continued, her voice quieter now. And when I couldn't be, it turned into resentment, toward Jake, toward Adam, toward all of you. I didn't know how to deal with it, so I just let it fester. And then I made it worse. You could have talked to us, I said, my voice firmer than I intended. I know that now, she replied, her eyes glistening with unshed tears. But at the time, it felt easier to blame other people. Admitting I was struggling felt like admitting I'd failed. I couldn't do that. Not to you guys. You do matter, I said, though the words felt heavy in my mouth. You've always mattered. You didn't need to create all that drama to get our attention. Rachel smiled faintly, but her expression was tinged with doubt. Thanks, she said. I'm working on believing that. Forgiving Rachel wasn't as simple as hearing her side of the story. Understanding why she'd done what she did helped, but it didn't erase the hurt. Her lies had left cracks in our relationships, and while she was trying to repair them, it was clear it would take time. Still, I could see she was making an effort. Therapy was helping her unpack years of unresolved feelings, and she was doing the work to rebuild her relationships, not just with Adam, but with all of us. He's been so patient with me, she said during another conversation. I don't deserve it, but he's stuck by me anyway. That's what love looks like, I told her, though I wasn't sure I fully believed it myself. Rachel nodded. I'm trying to love him better, too. To love all of you better. I know I can't undo what I did, but I want to make it right. Her sincerity felt real, but sincerity alone couldn't fix everything. Jake remained guarded, his interactions with Rachel polite but distant. Mom was warmer but cautious, her smiles smaller, and her words more measured. Rachel noticed the distance, but she didn't let it deter her. She kept showing up to family dinners, engaging in conversations even when the responses she got were lukewarm. She was trying, and for the first time, it felt like her effort was coming from a place of genuine care rather than guilt or obligation. Healing isn't linear. Some days felt like progress, while others reminded us just how fragile trust can be. But Rachel wasn't running from her mistakes anymore, and that gave me hope. For the first time in a long time, I could see the sister I loved again. It wasn't perfect and it wasn't easy, but it was a step forward. And sometimes that's all you can ask for. Our family is still finding its way through the fallout of Rachel's lies. There's no roadmap for this kind of mess, no quick fix that will magically erase the hurt or rebuild the trust that was broken. We're trying, but some days it feels like every step forward comes with 2 steps back. Conversations can feel strained, and every word seems to carry a weight it didn't before. Rachel's commitment to therapy and repairing her relationships is clear, but trust doesn't come back overnight. At family dinners, there are moments when things feel almost normal, like when she laughs at one of Jake's jokes or compliments Mom's cooking without a hint of hesitation. But there are other moments when the air in the room shifts, and you can feel the unspoken tension creeping back in. A passing comment might remind Jake of something she said in the past, or Mom might glance at her with that faint look of sadness that hasn't quite gone away. For her part, Rachel seems to understand the delicate balance we're all navigating. She doesn't push too hard, but she doesn't retreat either. She shows up, she listens, and she does her best to be present in a way that feels genuine. Adam is still by her side, quietly supporting her as she works through her insecurities and tries to rebuild what she nearly destroyed. She's making progress, Adam told me recently when we had coffee. It's not perfect, but she's really trying. That's all I can ask for. His faith in her is humbling. I don't know if I'd have the same patience if I were in his shoes, but he seems to approach the situation with an understanding that I'm still trying to grasp. He believes in her, and maybe that's part of what's keeping the rest of us moving forward, too. Jake, however, is still guarded. His interactions with Rachel are polite but distant, and while he stopped openly criticizing her, there's a lingering coolness in his tone whenever they talk. It's like he's waiting for the other shoe to drop, and I can't say I blame him. Jake has always been protective of our family, and Rachel's actions cut deeper than she probably realized. Mom is a little more forgiving, but even she seems more measured around Rachel than before. I've caught her watching Rachel during dinners, her expression unreadable, as if she's trying to reconcile the daughter she raised with the person who made so many unnecessary choices. As for me, I'm cautiously optimistic. This whole experience has taught me that family isn't the unbreakable force we sometimes pretend it is. It's messy, flawed, and deeply human. It can hurt you in ways nothing else can, but it's also worth fighting for, even when it hurts. There are still moments when I think about what Rachel did and feel a pang of anger or sadness. Those feelings don't just disappear because someone apologizes. But I'm learning to hold space for both the hurt and the healing, to accept that forgiveness isn't about erasing what happened, but about finding a way to move forward despite it. The road ahead is uncertain, and I don't know what our family will look like in a year or even a few months. Will Jake ever let go of his anger? Will Mom ever fully trust Rachel again? Will Rachel keep doing the work, or will she fall back into old patterns? I don't have the answers, and I've stopped expecting them. What I do know is that we're trying. For all the tension and the awkwardness and the unspoken feelings that still hang in the air, there's also effort. Rachel shows up, Adam shows up, and so do the rest of us. It's imperfect and uncomfortable, but it's something. And for the first time in a long time, it feels like we're moving in the right direction.